We'll reconvene this December 12th regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. Welcome to Harris Hall. Thank you for being here this afternoon. We have a couple of things on our agenda today. No emergency business to begin with, so we'll move directly into item 10A, which is from Public Works. Prior to me starting the script for this, I'll mention that anyone watching online or on the TV can click on View Items, and you'll receive all of the you'll see all the information the board is looking at regarding the item that we are discussing today. And item, excuse me. Item 10A is a second reading and public hearing on ordinance number PA 1358 in the matter of amending the Rural Comprehensive Plan to redesignate from agricultural to marginal land and rezone that land from exclusive farm use E40 to marginal land MLRSR with site review, adopting supplemental findings to address deficiencies of County Ordinance number PA 1317 as identified in the Land Use Board of Appeals remand of the county decision LUBA number 2016-019 and adopting savings and severability clauses, file number 509 PA 12-05208. Applicant is Iverson. PM and NBA 112817, third reading and deliberations on 1/9/2018. So, the decision of this, the reason for this meeting is the decision is subject to criteria cited in the agenda cover memo, as cited earlier, and attachments. Evidence and testimony must be directed toward the approval criteria, and failure to raise an issue to enable a response may preclude appeal to LUBA. The Board of Commissioners is the approval authority for these proceedings. So, item 3 is I'll announce opportunities. I'm reading a script here, right? So, just in case anybody hasn't figured that out. This is the opportunity for the parties to enter information into the record. Because this is a hearing on remand from the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA, all evidence and arguments must be limited to addressing the issues raised in the LUBA appeal, namely the sufficiency of findings regarding conflicts with the big game habitat on the subject property. Only persons who qualify as party may appeal the board's decision to LUBA. At this point, I'm going to call for disclosure of board members for ex parte contact and or for abstentions due to conflict of interest, ex parte contacts, or biases. In order from my left to my right, Commissioner Sorensen.
I have none.
Commissioner Bozovich.
I have none.
Commissioner Lycan.
I have none.
Commissioner Williams.
I have none.
And I have none. Now, just rules of decorum for the hall. No disorderly or disruptive conduct will be permitted. Audience demonstrations such as applause, cheering, and display of signs and or the conduct disruptive are not permitted. I don't see any signs of that in the room today. So at this point, I will ask the staff to step forward and receive the report. Mr. Mokrzycki.
I'll turn it over to Ms. Kay.
And I will turn it definitely over to Deanna Wright, our associate planner who's managing this project.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. In the item before you today, the board will hear arguments in a public hearing on an application that has been remanded from the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals. The subject property is map and tax lot number 180229, tax lot 3508. And as you can see on this graphic right here, you have to forgive me, I forgot my thumb drive, so I'm using the packet that's online. The subject property is an 85-acre piece of property located approximately south of Highway 58 and within or adjacent to the rural community of Pleasant Hill. In February 2016, the Board of Commissioners approved a plan amendment and zone change application for property zoned farmland to marginal land zone. The Planning Commission also recommended approval of the application to the board. The LUBA appeal followed and the decision was remanded back to the county. In the remand, the LUBA agreed with the appellant, Landwatch, that the adopted findings were insufficient and contained errors. The assignment of errors centers on the applicant's ESEE analysis, specifically related to the Goal 5 big game resource in Lane County. In the previous application, the applicant did the complex analysis, where normally professionals and experts are customarily hired to do the ESE analysis portion of any comprehensive plan amendment. The current applicant, Jordan Iverson, has now brought in an attorney to supplement and correct the shortcomings of the original ESEE analysis, which is attachment 4 in your packet. So a little background of what an ESCE is. It's an analysis that contains the environmental, social, economic, and energy consequences of either allowing, limiting, or not allowing a proposed use, and the Lane County RCP policies assist to identify what constitutes a conflict. It's important because when an area is proposed for change, such as in a marginal lands plan amendment, the applicant must address the proposal's consistency with Goal 5. If a conflict to the Goal 5 resource is identified, the applicant must conduct an ESCE analysis. So the flaw in the original findings for the ESCE was the applicant concluded that there was no conflict, which sidestepped the RCP's numerical standard, and that there was no expert testimony supplementing the applicant's opinion of no conflict. The record is now augmented with the attorney's supplemental findings and an environmental specialist letter to correct this error. Staff anticipates rebuttal testimony today, which we'll likely hear, which is why we're requesting that the record be kept open after today. The related policies to this remand are Rural Comp Plan Goal 5, Flora and Fauna Policies 11 and 12. As for Policy 11, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife sets a recommended overall residential density for residential development so that the number of residential units will not exceed one dwelling unit per 40 acres in the peripheral big game habitat area. The county has completed the inventory and has mapped the county into 3 big game categories: impacted, peripheral, and major. The subject property contains 35 acres of peripheral, and the remainder is impacted big game habitat. So in this graphic, you could see that this portion right here is the 35 acres of peripheral big game, and the remainder of the property is impacted big game habitat. The new marginal land zoning could allow for a total of 4 new lots with 3 new dwellings potentially located in the peripheral big game area. So what you'll see in this graphic is 4 lots, which is here's one proposed parcel, the second proposed, third proposed parcel, and then this right here, this would be the fourth 20-acre parcel with the existing dwelling in the north of the property. Thus, there could essentially be a dwelling unit on each of the 20-acre parcels as seen in the graphic in the red dots where there's a hypothetical building location. So the stated conflict would be a request to allow a total of 3 dwellings in the peripheral big game area where ODFW standard only recommends 1 dwelling. This is where the applicant and staff do currently disagree. Staff believes the incremental impact is 2 dwellings, where the applicant believes that the incremental impact is 1 dwelling unit in the peripheral big game area. However, we're going to hear from the applicant in a few minutes so that they can clarify their conflict assessment. So for policy number 12, it says that if uses conflict with Goal 5, then they do an ESCE analysis. And again, that's within attachment 4 in your packet. The steps to an ESCE are outlined in OAR 660-023-0040. They are: step 1, identify the conflicting uses. Step 2, determine the impact area. Step 3, analyze the ESCE consequences. And step 4, develop a program to achieve Goal 5. I'm going to let the applicant discuss more in detail in his supplemental findings to you today, but per the applicant, the proposed program to achieve the goal, which is step 4, is to allow the conflicting low-density residential use. In conclusion, what the applicant is asking the board is to allow the conflict with the evidence in the record. But under the OAR rule, in developing a program to achieve consistency with Goal 5, the board has 3 options, which are: 1, prohibit the proposed conflict; 2, limit the conflict; or 3, allow the conflict. I do have copies of the OAR, which I printed out today, and I'm able to hand these out to the commissioners if that's what you wish, rather than get it later in the supplemental staff report. There's extra copies for us too.
And we promise not to read while you're talking.
I'm almost finished. So at this point, we don't have a recommendation for action because we anticipate additional testimony today. But what staff is recommending is that the record be kept open in order to allow for additional rebuttal testimony to be submitted, and that the deliberations occur at a later date. Staff would return with a supplemental staff report. This does conclude my staff report at this time. I'm able to answer any questions now or during the hearing should they arise.
Thank you. Prior to opening the public hearing, any questions from the board? I see none. So we'll move forward. At this point, I will open the public hearing.
Commissioner.
Excuse me.
Sorry, Chair Farr.
Yeah.
If I might interrupt real quick, I just want to clarify, so the board's aware and the parties as well, that this matter should be interpreted as a continuation of the earlier application on remand from LUBA. And so essentially what you'd be doing is conducting a supplemental hearing to supplement the hearings that have already been done and to reopen the record to accept any new evidence and testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Then at this point, I will open the supplemental hearing to review additional testimony, additional information. At this point, please, would like the applicant or the applicant's representative step forward and provide testimony or argument. Mr. Close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Bill Close, 375 West 4th Avenue, Suite 204, Eugene, representing the applicant. I was going to hand out that graphic right there, but I think if we just leave it up there, I won't hand it out. This is round 2 on this. I got involved late in round 1. Boyd Iverson handled this, put this application together and got it pretty much through the county process. And then decided to go off and have chemotherapy instead of finishing the process on his own. So I'm finishing it up for his family now. And what happened in round 1 was that there wasn't any opposition until the actual hearing in front of the county board last day, last minute, and Landwatch came in and put a letter in, and the record was closed. So the upshot of that was they had raised an issue, which was a good issue. With the record closed, we couldn't really address it. County was set to approve it. The county approved it, and the appeal was made to LUBA by Landwatch. So in looking at the pile of everything that wound up at LUBA, we realized they'd raised a good issue about Goal 5. Boyd Iverson had done the Goal 5 analysis in his best traditional self-help manner, and they raised a competent issue, and so we said to LUBA, that's a good issue, so you need to send it back and we'll fix the Goal 5 issue, and that's why we're here. Landwatch has not made an appearance yet in this proceeding, but I suspected that they're going to show up on the last day at the last minute again and dump something in the record, and we need to address that. Staff recommends keeping the record open, which will allow us time to respond to anything they have to say and time to tune up the findings, because every time I look at the draft findings, I find some more little nits and things that ought to be cleaned up. So I think the procedural path the staff has for you is a good one. Staff, I would like to compliment the staff on the absolutely professional way they've handled the remand proceeding today. Staff indicated they had an issue with us as to really what is the increment of impact of this proposal. It's really how you think of it. In our submittal, we said we think that allowing this use would allow one more dwelling unit on this property than ODFW recommends in their conditions. Staff says, well, the way we look at it, we think it would really allow 2 more dwelling units than ODFW would recommend. I don't want to argue about that. I think that the difference between 1 and 2 is really nominal, and we're happy to make sure that our evidence and our findings justify the 2. The key thing here is that the only Goal 5 protected area that you see on this map is the bluish or purplish stuff in the southeast part of that property. It's about 35 acres, give or take. That is peripheral big game habitat. That's the poor man's big game habitat. There are 2 protected categories of big game habitat. One is major big game, which is described as being the big industrial timberland, wide open spaces. Incidentally, it also includes large areas of South Eugene, subdivided land, which indicates to you how generalized and gross these ODFW maps are. But big game, major big game habitat is the big one. Not supposed to have any dwelling units at all. And then one step down is the peripheral big game habitat, which is defined as being kind of in the foothill areas where the big game habitat is negatively impacted by low-density residential uses and such. They still see it as important habitat, but it's one step down. And in that area, ODFW's recommendations say no more than one dwelling unit per 40 acres, please. So that's the level of protection that the plan and code for the county anticipates, because y'all went with ODFW's recommendation. The third category is impacted big game habitat, which ODFW says written off. No value, no need to protect it. And that's all the green portion of this site, everything to the southwest and everything to the north. And it makes sense. You can see as you get up closer to the north, you get into the Pleasant Hill community, and so the value drops off to 0. But that area in the southeast is, in fact, peripheral big game habitat, and it's not supposed to have more than one dwelling unit per 40 acres. And then I guess the pitch we had made to the county staff was that each of those little rectangles there is about 20 acres or so. And so you could have, it depends on whether when you say 40 acres to protect the big game, does that mean 40 acres on the individual parcel or 40 acres together as a unit? You can see the peripheral big game habitat bleeds off to the east there. So there are different ways of looking at it and different ways of counting it, but at most it's 2 additional units over what ODFW recommends. So that does, in fact, then cause a Goal 5 conflict, and that is what we had to evaluate in the remand proceeding, and that's what we had our big animal biologist look at. And his detailed letters in the file, he went out there and kicked the dirt and looked at the whole area, and he said really low-density residential development at a density of 20 units per acre, minimum acreage, is not going to have an appreciable impact on big game in this area, given what's out there in the immediate vicinity. That's his expert opinion. And our request to the county is, please go with that assessment and approve this use, which recognizes that you're going to have a Goal 5 conflict, but you really limit the conflict by having the 20-acre minimum lot size that comes with marginal land. So, as staff correctly said, you can fully protect the resource, you can write off the resource, or you can allow the conflicting use but limit it. So what we're really suggesting is the marginal land zone with a 20-acre minimum density is adequate to limit the conflicting use in consideration of the larger picture, what's happening out here close into Pleasant Hill. So that's the big picture. I'm happy to answer any questions. Look forward to what Landwatch has to say and responding to that.
Just a clarification, Mr. Close. At one point you said 20 units per acre. At all times you meant 20 acres.
Oh, I meant 20 acres per unit.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I said.
Okay.
Thank you. Questions or comments for Mr. Close? I hear none at this point in time. Then we'll entertain appellant Landwatch's Lane County testimony on, let's see, the next level of testimony and argument. Landwatch. Please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Sean Malone on behalf of Landwatch Lane County, 259 East 5th Avenue, Suite 200C, Eugene.
Thank you.
First thing I'd like to say is it sounds like on the agenda, the board has 2 options right now. Deny the application, which obviously I'd encourage you all to do based on the deficiencies that LUPA found. The second option is to reopen the record to allow the information submitted by the applicant, and then to allow Landwatch to respond in 7 days, and then another 7 days allow the applicant its final written rebuttal. In the absence of denying the application, I'm happy with that second option. And so I'll take the majority of my time in written response in 7 days. But I think boil this down to the essence, it's that ODF&W made a recommendation for peripheral big game habitat to have one dwelling, one home site per 40 acres. Here we have 35 acres. So that should equal one dwelling. They want more or less two on that. If the board could come to the conclusion to allow three additional dwellings, or excuse me, 2 additional dwellings, because there's already an existing dwelling, we would have no further problem with this case. And that is, the board would be acting consistent with what's in your comprehensive plan that you all approved at some point. That is 40 acres equals one dwelling in regards to peripheral big game habitat. Now, what the applicant wants to do is doesn't want to play by those rules, doesn't want to play by your rules that you set, wants to have more, wants 2 dwellings on 35 acres. So I think ODF&W here clearly has the expertise. They made the recommendation. You all implemented it in your comprehensive plan. And all Land Watch is asking at this point is that you uphold what you did in your comprehensive plan and not further parcelize rural Lane County. And that's really the gist of it. Are you going to stick with what you guys said years ago, or are you going to decide to further parcelize resource land at the expense of your constituents? And with that, unless there's any questions, I really don't have anything further to say.
Okay. If I may just restate something that you said initially, that we have 2 options before us. One is to deny, the second is to close the public record and but leave testimony, let's see, but keep the record open for 7 days, et cetera, and you're fine with that, absent the straight-out denial?
That's correct. So the applicant has submitted new information, and essentially by statute, I'm allowed to respond to that in 7 days, and then 7 days after that, the applicant gets a final written rebuttal, and I'm okay with that in the absence of a denial.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I see none. Additional staff comment? None at this point in time. A rebuttal from the applicant.
It's very nice to be back. Sounds like this is a great opportunity to agree with Land Watch that we should keep the record open and allow the additional evidence and go from there. I just want to, perhaps I didn't emphasize enough the basic nature of Goal 5. Goal 5 does not, LUBA did not find, didn't say what the county has to do with the Goal 5 issue on remand. What LUBA said, we told LUBA said that they should say, is that there is a conflict with a Goal 5 resource, and therefore on remand the county should address Goal 5 directly. And that's what's happening here. Addressing Goal 5 directly means you go through the analysis. It does not dictate the outcome you have to reach. That is, it's fully within the authority of the board to deny this or to approve it with limiting to 1 additional unit or 2 additional units or 3 additional units. Those are, all of those are an option for you. It's one of these areas we have a lot of discretion. But it's totally okay for you to approve this with all 3 additional units, provided you make you go through the Goal 5 analysis correctly, and that's what we have done, we think. You know, that's really your ultimate policy choice, I think. So, thank you.
Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Close. Then at this point, we have 2 options before us. One is to move to close the public hearing, but keep the record open with the 7-day, keep the record open for 7 days, followed by a 7-day rebuttal period, and then to return on January 9th with a time certain. The other is to deny. So both the applicant and the appellant seem to agree that, well, in one way or another, they agree that option 1 is a good option at this point in time. So discussion to the options or discussion for a motion? Commissioner Bozievich.
So I have a question for staff real quick. One, as we're talking about keeping a record open for 7 days, that would be to December 19th. You want that by 4 p.m. because isn't that when your office closes?
Great, thank you.
Okay, so 4 p.m. on that. And then the second question is then for the rebuttal, standard is 7 days, but that includes a national holiday. Do we need to have that go to the 27th instead of the 26th?
Our office will be open on the 26th.
So you want to have that, the rebuttal due on the 26th?
Yes, please.
By 4 p.m.?
Yes.
Just want to make sure I make the motion correctly, that's all. So it gets around to. No other questions at this time.
Anything further from staff then? You'll be closed on Christmas Day, so it'll be one actual less day for rebuttal, although the time period would be the same.
It's calendar days.
Yeah, calendar days, right.
Yeah.
Very good. Commissioner Bozievich.
So I want to make sure, I'm watching legal counsel to wait to make sure that they're okay with that.
There's a discussion whether it should be, of whether there should be an additional 7 days. So we'll see what the attorneys come up with here.
7 days? Mr. Close.
By loose consensus, I'm back to talk about procedure.
Okay.
The applicant's really quite flexible on procedure, provided that we have an opportunity to respond with evidence to whatever evidence Landwatch puts in 7 days.
Okay.
Beyond that, I think it's typically 7, 7, and 7, but that second 7 is us responding to whatever Landwatch puts in, and Landwatch can also respond to whatever we put in at the first 7 days.
It's such a treat to see you guys singing in harmony that this is fine. So did you have something to say?
Yeah. It's my buddy, Sean.
Yeah.
What's written in your motion on your agenda is what I'm contemplating. That is, the applicants, you're reopening the record right now to put in new evidence that the applicants put in there. That's his new evidence. He's have that opportunity to put evidence in. I have not put in any evidence. So I now get an opportunity to respond to that. And then he gets a written rebuttal. And that's what's in your motion right now. I think what's being proposed by Mr. Cluse is different than that. And so I encourage you to go with what is in your motion as prepared by staff.
So what's in the motion is to move to close the public hearing, but we don't have a motion yet, but would be to move to close the public hearing, but keep the record open with the following suggested dates, 7 days and 7 days.
If I could suggest, I think what we need to do now, presuming there's a motion and board agreement, is to close the public hearing to reopen the record. Remember, this is a record from however many months ago that was closed. Reopen the record to allow into evidence the stuff that Mr. Close, on behalf of the Iverson has submitted already. And in addition, 7 days for Mr. Malone on behalf of Landwatch to respond with written material, be it argument or evidentiary material, and then 7 days after that for the applicant to submit written rebuttal to any of the new evidence that has come in from Landwatch, which would include, as I understand Mr. Close's argument, evidentiary material that responds to the Landwatch material.
That's right.
Which is the way the motion is written basically here. So, okay, very good.
I disagree with that. Written rebuttal should not include evidence. So that last 7 days shouldn't include evidence. This essentially gives the applicant 2 bites at the apple to put new evidence in, and it would limit us. So the applicant is now having its time to put new evidence in. I haven't put in any new evidence. I'm only asking to respond to that evidence. And then after that, the applicant gets its written rebuttal, which is limited solely to argument. If the applicant wanted to do more, he should have brought it to the table today. So what's written in your motion there is what I believe is correct.
Okay, then, Mr. Clark, what I'm seeing in the motion, the suggested motion, is the applicant's final rebuttal and written argument.
Yeah, and there's no magic to what's in the memo. It's a suggestion. This board gets to decide what motion it wants to make. Legally, I do not think you're required to extend it out 3 weeks. You can certainly do that if you want to. What this board is familiar with is the 7 days plus 7 days plus 7 days statutory process, whereby anybody can submit evidence in the first 7 days The next, you've got response to any new material submitted, and then a final 7 days for rebuttal by the applicant.
Right.
Essentially what we're talking about.
I'm not asking to put in new evidence. I'm just asking to respond to the evidence that was put in today. If the applicant wanted to put in more new evidence and have you guys reopen the record, then they should have brought that to the table today. This prolongs it. The applicant's position prolongs it, and it allows the applicant 2 bites at the apple. That's fundamentally unfair.
Our evidence, our experts' report's been in the record for months. What I want to avoid is, we've seen nothing from Landwatch for the last year on this, nothing. And so I just want to avoid the problem of having Landwatch put a lot of evidence in the record and not have a chance to respond to it. It's one thing for him to say, well, we're going to strictly limit our evidential response to your evidence. It never seems to work out that way. We're not in a rush to get this done. The important thing is to do it right. If each side has 7 days to put in evidence, and then each side has 7 days to respond to evidence, and then the applicant gets a final argument, then nobody can complain about procedure, and all evidence has been responded to.
And the reason why we haven't put anything in the record is because we won the case. It's on them to bring new information to the board to support their case, and that's what they've done.
All right.
And we're only looking to respond to that.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask for a clarification and a recommendation from you, Mr. Clark, and then we'll take your recommendation at its value.
So if I could recapitulate, I think Mr. Close's last point, which is the safe route to go probably is to do 7 + 7 + 7. And that avoids these procedural arguments, which, given the likelihood of appeal, may appear at LUBA. And so what that would look like would be 7 days for either of the two parties to submit new evidence and or argument into the record. 7 days for either party to respond to what was put into the record during the previous 7 days.
Which takes us to the 26th.
Right. And then one final week for written rebuttal argument only. That is no new evidence for the final week.
Which takes us to the 2nd of January.
Correct.
And then do the third reading on the 23rd.
Yes.
So,
20, I'm sorry.
so under this idea, then both parties submit evidence?
Yeah, in this first 7 days, both parties can submit
But the whole
additional
purpose of the hearing today was to get the evidence in the record from the applicant, which they met. And now it's the opposing party that has an opportunity to respond to that. I still don't understand. You mean you're going to have both parties replying to on the same day?
It's
Well-
not uncommon to,
This is the typical statutory process when we're talking about quasi-judicial land use hearings, where you've got the 7 + 7 + 7 days, and the second 7-day period is the opportunity for both sides to respond to the evidence submitted in the previous 7 days.
Without further testimony, I think we probably are ready for a motion. Commissioner Bozovich, are you ready for a motion?
Yeah, I think so. So I'd like to move to close the public hearing, but leave the record open for any parties to submit additional evidence for 7 days to December 19th, 2017, 4 p.m., and then to provide 7 days for arguments based on any new evidence to be submitted until December 26th at 4 p.m., and then to give the applicant 7 days to rebut all those arguments until January 2nd, 4 p.m., 2018, and then to hold the third reading and deliberations on January 23rd, 2018.
We have a motion.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozovich, seconded by Commissioner Lyken. Mr. Clark.
If I can clarify, I didn't catch all of the motion, but you can tell me if I'm recapitulating correctly. The initial 7-day period you discussed would be for either party to submit more evidence or argument. The second 7-day period would be for either parties to submit responsive evidence or argument, that is, responding to the previous 7 days, with the final 7 days being written argument only from the applicant. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's where the motion is, with the January 23rd as the deliberation date. Commissioner Sorensen.
Mr. Chair,
Motion.
just a question then on for our legal counsel. So the applicant gets 2 opportunities to submit their original evidence, today's evidence, and then a second opportunity to submit in 7 more days more evidence, and then to respond to whatever evidence. So that means the applicant gets 3 times to submit evidence under this proposal. I don't understand why we can't just go back to what was suggested, where the evidence has been put in. Now the opponents get to put their evidence in 7 days. Why give one side 3 chances?
Commissioner, if I can respond. First of all, it's a land use proceeding that started, I don't know when. Anybody who wants to has had opportunity to submit evidence into the record. The applicant can submit evidence into the record from filing of the application up until the hearing and then beyond. This is not a trial where the record is closed at the conclusion of the trial. And that's why we got these open record periods. It's impossible, I think, for either party to always accurately anticipate the evidence that's going to come in at any particular time. And that's why I think the statute sets up a process whereby applicants and opponents can look at the evidence in the record and have time to respond to that particular evidence. The applicant's concern here is that for the first time he may see evidence that's never been discussed before and wants an opportunity to respond to it. By the time that the opponent's land watch will be submitting potentially new evidence into the record in the first week, they will have seen all of the evidence from the applicant, save for evidence that is responsive only to what they submit.
If I may put that in terms that people listening may understand, everybody so far has had an equal opportunity to submit evidence. And going forward from this point, everybody will have an equal opportunity to submit evidence. And subsequent to that, everybody will have an equal opportunity for rebuttal or responsive argument. Everything is equal.
With the statutory proviso that the last bite at the apple, if you will, in terms of argument goes to the applicant, because that's what the law says.
And am I correct in thinking everybody's had equal opportunity to this point? Whether
yes,
it be the 2 parties here today or any other party for that matter has had equal opportunity?
Correct.
Okay. That's what it sounds like to me. So we have a motion with a second. I need further discussion to the motion. The motion is moved by Commissioner Bozovich, seconded by Commissioner Lycan. Commissioner Sorensen, to the motion.
It seems like since we have an application that has been remanded, we would be wanting to, procedurally make sure that the winning side in the appeal is satisfied that they are being treated fairly by the process of the remand. It seems like with their opposition to this proposal and being in favor of what was, I thought, a very reasonable position by staff, you're opening up, aren't you, Mr. Clark, the possibility that this unfairness will become a legal issue where it doesn't have to be a legal issue? You're giving them 3 times.
I'm not sure what the alternative is. At some point, you need to close off the ability for folks to submit evidence into the record. And either you get the applicant complaining about it or the opponents complaining about it if they don't get the last shot at that.
But the applicants already submitted the evidence, and the opponents have, under statute, an opportunity to put evidence in response to that. So why create
that same statutory scheme? It provides that the applicant has an opportunity to submit material in response to new evidence that comes in the first 7 days. And that's what this motion speaks to.
So just for my clarity, once again, everybody's getting an equal chance to submit evidence, has already and will throughout the balance of the process.
I will tell you my legal opinion is that the motion complies with the statutory requirements.
That's good enough. Thank you. Commissioner Bozievich?
I think that says it all, really. This complies with what Land Watch was asking for, which was equal opportunity and not to overbalance it. And Land Watch could have submitted evidence for today. The applicant's rebuttal and all that has been online for a week, and they could have submitted additional evidence today if they had chosen to, the appellant, I should say. And there's, we are providing 7 days for additional evidence relative to this particular issue. Of course, they can't submit anything dealing with other issues because that's not what was on remand. And then we're providing opportunity for both sides to provide argument about whatever is submitted in that 7 days, and then that final rebuttal period. It's an equal opportunity. It matches exactly what we've done for multiple land use actions. The previous proposal just to do 2 7-day periods did not match. And I have to agree with Land Watch that it did not appear to be a fair opportunity. I think what we're doing is providing that equal fair opportunity per their request.
Right.
If staff could just add something real quick. The staff report will be available. It's going to be a supplemental staff report based off additional testimony, and we could have that ready by January 9th.
By January 9th. Thank you. Which still remains the 23rd would be the deliberation date. Okay, very good. So prior to closing the hearing, we'll take the vote. Then we have before us a motion by Commissioner Bozievich, which includes the dates of December 19th, December 26th, January 2nd, and January 23rd. I will not fill in the details since that's already been stated. Further discussion to the motion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Passes 4-1 with Commissioner Sorensen opposed. Thank you. At this point, then, I will close the public hearing and keep the record open till December 19th at 4 p.m. with a rebuttal period through December 26th at 4 p.m. And response by January 2nd at 4 p.m. and a deliberation on January 23rd, time certain, probably 1:30. Okay. All right, then with this gavel, I will close the hearing and keep the record open. Okay. Did anybody say anything? Nope. Yeah. Very well, then let's move along to, excuse me. Item 10B, which is second reading and public hearing on ordinance number PA 1354 in the matter of amending the Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan to adopt an updated Lane County Transportation System Plan and adopting savings and severability clauses. And second reading and public hearing on ordinance number 1706 in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 15 to update roadway performance standards, PMNBA 2/9/16, 6/29/16, 1/24/17, and 11/28/17. And Mr. Mokrahajski, today I believe we have Ms. Becky Taylor with us. You have 5 minutes. Mr. Mokrahajski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have two of our outstanding transportation planners here, David Reeser and Becky Taylor, and so I'll turn it over to them for presentation today.
Thank you, and actually I'll have Dave Reeser start the presentation.
All right.
Good afternoon, Ms. Reeser.
Good afternoon, Chair Farr and Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here today after several years of work on this project and including public input. We are requesting final adoption of the Lane County Transportation System Plan. Again, this is an update from the previous 2004 Transportation System Plan. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge the hard work and effort of our project team who has been developing this final plan for you to review and consider today. And some of those folks are in the audience today. if you would raise your hand when I call your name. Bill Johnston with ODOT. And I also want to thank ODOT for providing us with the funding for this project. Also from DKS Associates, we have Jordan Kelly and we have Scott Manser. And both Becky and I wanted to say that DKS has done an outstanding job on this project. We really appreciate their work. And of course, Becky Taylor, who has been our Lane County project manager. Really appreciate the hard work she's put in, and she has really shepherded this project through the process. I also want to thank Peggy Kepler, our county engineer, Tim Elsey, our public works director, and Petra Sheets, our assistant public works director, for their input and guidance through this process. The timing of this TSP coincides well with our recent transportation safety planning efforts and the state's recent passage of House Bill 2017. Working on this plan update gave us the opportunity to take a fresh look at our transportation policies and our project list for the next 20 years. And our team greatly appreciates the input and guidance this board has given us along the way. And we look forward to future implementation of this plan through our ongoing transportation safety implementation efforts, as well as our upcoming update to the capital improvement program. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Becky for her presentation.
Thank you, Chair Farr, Commissioners, and I want to thank the board for their input in your prior work sessions on these final products before you today. The staff presentation in today's public hearing is to inform your decision on these final products. I will highlight the key components in this staff presentation, but note your packet includes two ordinances under consideration for your decision. One is for the TSP and one is for implementing code amendments. Your packet also includes findings of compliance with the applicable approval criteria, concluding with staff's recommendation that the board adopt the ordinances as presented. Your packet also includes alternative motions should the board choose to make a decision on the ordinances today. Our transportation system plan identifies all modes of transportation in Lane County, including services not provided by Lane County, such as public transportation, bus, train, air. Our analysis focused on what was within our control, our 1,400 miles of roadway, particularly our major roadways known as arterials and collectors. Our analysis excluded areas within urban growth boundaries, and instead we refer to the respective city transportation system plans, which Lane County co-adopts. This means we focused on the rural roadways, and unlike the urban areas, the rural roadways have few congestion issues. However, there are significant safety issues. There are more roadway fatalities in the rural area than in the urban area, and as you know, more people died in rural Lane County than other counties in Oregon in 2014 and 2015. We address this with policy in this updated transportation system plan, as well as our new transportation safety action plan, which the board adopted in July. And this TSP includes several projects to improve safety on our roadways. We also heard from the public in our outreach process that it's difficult to get around rural Lane County without a car. So this TSP recommends that we develop a subsequent countywide active transportation plan for human-powered transportation like walking and biking, especially to support safe routes to schools, but also for public and community health, vitality, and economic prosperity. Again, safety is our key challenge, which we face with a strong commitment to reduce fatal and severe injury collisions. This updated TSP proposes new safety policies, which were the focus of prior work sessions with the board, and most of the projects recommended in this updated TSP are to improve the safety of existing roadways. Resiliency and sustainability are themes throughout the TSP and are especially reflected in some new mapping tools that are included in this updated TSP. Namely, there are maps of emergency routes and of freight routes. We also prioritized improvements on these routes. And again, thanks to the board for your direction on those maps at your prior work sessions. This is our public process diagram. Our TSP was developed on a strong public involvement structure with intentional opportunities created at each stage of product development to integrate community values and needs. Public participation was a continuous process consisting of a series of activities and actions such as an interactive web page and community workshops and other targeted outreach events. Representatives from various cities and other service providers also weighed in as technical and stakeholder advisory teams, and a couple of them are showing solidarity in the audience today. I appreciate that. And most recently, the Planning Commission held a public hearing and recommended approval of the TSP and code amendments just on September 19th of this year. The goals and policies of the TSP follow this guiding framework to address safety, economic vitality, the natural environment, equity and accessibility, mobility, connectivity, active transportation and public health, coordination, funding, maintenance, and preservation. There is greater certainty with transportation funding with the passage of House Bill 2017. The revenue increases have a positive impact on Lane County and all of Oregon, as you know. In addition to the formula funds and earmarked funds, there are competitive funding sources listed here through the statewide transportation improvement program and within the MPO, the Surface Transportation Block Grant, formerly known as STPU, and then some dedicated safety funding, All Roads Transportation Safety. So the figures listed here on this slide, the approximate 67.5 million is over a 20-year planning horizon. These figures represent our work with ODOT to make some reasonable assumptions about how much of the competitive funds Lane County could be expected to successfully compete for and secure. So these competitive sources are essentially our budget for the TSP projects for the purpose of TSP planning. Projects that have a reasonable chance of being funded within the 20-year planning horizon are identified as financially constrained. The reasonable chance has to do with how competitive the projects would be in the competitive funding environment. And as you can imagine, there is much more need than available funding. The projects that have no funding assumptions are compiled in what we call an illustrative list to help us keep track of our needs as we continue to seek additional funding. Overall, the TSP project list is intended to enable us to compete and advocate more effectively for funding. The TSP also establishes standards for our roadways, which are implemented through Lane Code. Therefore, we are proposing concurrent amendments to Lane Code Chapter 15 to implement the recommendations, which include consistency with policy direction to defer to cities within their urban growth boundaries to provide clarity and consistency. We heard that this has been problematic in the past, and we made this change in response to our advisory committees. Similarly, to minimize confusion with cities, we have created equivalent metrics for measuring operational performance. Lane County and also ODOT use what's known as a volume to capacity or VC ratio, whereas cities typically use a level of service or LOS metric. The code amendments create an LOS metric alongside a VC ratio. And to increase our ability to evaluate safety concerns, we recommend 3 additional applicability provisions to the traffic impact analysis requirements. And all of these are intended to enable a review of safety factors and not just operational performance. This is my last slide. I wanted to highlight what implementation of this TSP before you would result in over the 20-year period. It would result in safer roads through projects that widen shoulders, improve geometrics and traffic control, and incorporate systemic safety such as rumble strips and guardrails. It would result in more multimodal connections through projects that address the needs of all roadway users, including freight trucks and bicycles. And it would result in transportation infrastructure to support areas of growth, namely around Goshen, to implement the Goshen Regional Employment and Transition, or GREAT Plan, which, as you know, was the planning effort undertaken by Lane County in 2012. Improving the safety and mobility of Lane County's transportation system will be an ongoing effort through the planning horizon of 2036. The TSP provides the roadmap for us to make transportation decisions and investments consistent with Lane County's needs and goals. I'll conclude with just a procedural reminder. The adoption process is an amendment to the Rural Comprehensive Plan, and it is subject to public notification and public hearing provisions of Lane Code 16.400, which you'll have a public hearing following my staff presentation. And again, in your packet are findings of compliance with the approval criteria. And again, staff recommends approval based on the current record, but we're also looking forward to hearing any public comment. That concludes my staff presentation.
Thank you. Discussion, questions on the staff presentation? I see none at this point in time, other than project number 19C. When is that going to begin? That is the Beltline Road New Arterial Bridge. Oh, never mind. At this point, then, I'll open the public hearing. Anyone signed up for the public hearing today? We have, let's see, I don't have a sign-up sheet. However, please step forward, state your name and address for the record, and you will have 3 minutes to make a statement. And bear with me just 1 second before I give you the go. Okay, if you could go ahead and state your name and address for the record.
I'm Pete Petty. I live at 49460 Mackenzie Highway in Vida. Actually, it's Nimrod. We're very encouraged by the plan. A lot of aspects of the plan are appealing to those of us who live along the Mackenzie Highway, a very dangerous stretch of highway, and safety is a major concern of ours. Positives in the plan include improvements to the Hendricks Bridge Park intersection and the Deer Horn intersection. We're hopeful, I'm hopeful that the planners will consider pedestrians and bicyclists in their improvements they make, and it sounds as though that's in the plan, which is good. I have one objection to one little part of the plan, and it involves a little park along the Mackenzie Highway in Nimrod, the Eagle Rock Park, which is a small acreage little community park, neighborhood park. Buried in the plan here, it's on the wish list part of the plan. It's project 75A, and it calls for improvements or enhancements to the entrance from the highway to this park. The problem is the entrance to this park is on a very dangerous curve of that highway. And any attempt to bring more and more traffic in from the highway would not be a good idea. Since its inception as a park, it's always been a neighborhood park, accessible mostly from the water and from neighbors walking into the park on the system of trails. We're very much interested in keeping it that way. I think that little provision for that enhancement may have been part of a master plan that the Parks Department had that has been scrapped, and that plan called for that park to be turned into a RV camp. And of course, the neighbors and all of us in that area were very much opposed to that plan. I'm currently working on the task force, helping to come up with a new master plan, and we made it pretty apparent that we're very much opposed to any major development in our little Eagle Rock Park. Otherwise, anything that can be done to improve the safety of the Mackenzie Highway we're all in favor of. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you all about this, and I wish you all safe and happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petty. The next person we have signed up is Rob Zako.
Thank you, Chair Farr, Commissioners. I'm Rob Zako, Executive Director of Better Eugene Springfield Transportation, Post Office Box 773, Eugene, Oregon 97440. I don't have a lot to tell you today that you don't already know. I thought I'd read a couple clips from the Register Guard and make some closing comments. So first, the bad news. Cottage Grove. The mother of a 13-year-old boy who died in a crash Wednesday evening on Highway 99 north of Cottage Grove identified her son, Wesley Meadows, in a public Facebook post Friday morning, describing him as a kind spirit. In her Facebook post, Virginian Sexton said her son was very loved by everyone that he met, and they lived life to the fullest and he loved life so much. Oregon State Police Sergeant Kyle Hove said Meadows was bicycling south on Highway 99 when he was struck by a 2002 GMC pickup truck driven by Richard Perini. You know this, tragedy, just last Wednesday. Second story last Thursday, Cottage Grove. A Cottage Grove man was killed. A woman, also from Cottage Grove, was seriously injured on a crash on Highway 99 north of Cottage Grove around 7:30 p.m. Thursday. It was the second fatal crash this week on that winding, narrow stretch of road. I don't need to go on. This happens too much. You know that. That's the bad news. The good news is you have great staff. They recognize the problem. You recognize the problem. There's a lot to like in the TSP here, but emphasizing safety and doing what we can in Lane County is absolutely essential. I applaud all the work on this, and we urge you to support this plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Zeko. This concludes the list of folks who signed up to testify today. If anyone else in the audience wishes to testify before the Board of County Commissioners in the public hearing on the TSP, please step forward. I see no one. At this point, I will close the public hearing and open it to the board for response. I see none at this point. Then staff, we're ready to for the presentation.
I provided my presentation before the public hearing, and the comments that I heard did not change the staff recommendation. I will say, though, that the project of concern 75A, the entrance to the park, that is on our illustrative list, meaning we know that there's a need and there is a solution to a safety problem out there. The project is for improving the visibility of that curve and the entrance to the park. So I did get the gentleman's contact information, and if it ever looks like we could get funding 20 years from now for that improvement, I would reach out to him and consider some public involvement. But at this point, this project is so low on our radar for implementation. But at your discretion, you could remove that project from the list in response to the testimony. I personally wouldn't recommend removing the project.
Thank you. And that covers a question that I had, and that is on the illustrative list. So 2 decades from now is as soon as we could probably, unless some windfall occurs in the meantime, which we don't anticipate, and at which point the discussion regarding how the improvement was made would be a public process, I would suspect. So, okay. Any further questions from the board? Any questions for staff or comments regarding, before we move on Ordinance 1358? Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I just want to say to our staff, Becky in particular, but also David, thank you so much for the work and for the consultants that worked on this. And I think, as Rob Zeko stated, this is a good step. And unfortunately, I think we're going to continue to read some of those tragedies that occur. And but I think at the same time, what we're trying to do is kind of work towards ending those tragedies. We've talked a lot about having that public safety component as part of it. That's a challenge, of course. But I really appreciate the thinking out of the box that our transportation staff does, because it becomes more than just a traffic team. I mean, just things when Mr. Elsey has come and come before the board and talked about just some engineering components, or just some simple things as doing something with a guardrail, or things like that aren't so expensive, but yet could cause such incredible deterrent and help with those safety things. So I think that's really something I really appreciate. The other word that I like hearing over and over again is connectivity. I think that's something you're going to hear over and over and over again, regardless if it's a safety plan. I think it really comes down to economic development.
I think what you're going to see is more like-minded counties in different parts of the state that are going to realize that that's how you're going to solve a lot of these big issues, is working together, collaborate, and having that connectivity. We're one Oregon. We're 36 counties, but we're one Oregon. And it's kind of amazing on what it's sitting back and able to watch all these counties in the state step up to support their legislators to get a transportation package done was pretty impressive. And I salute all of our commissioners and judges, whether, especially on the east side. I got to tell you, that was very, very impressive. But also the metro area, Washington County and Clackamas County, they could have just walked away and said, we're going to do our own, have a good day, but they didn't. They stayed with it. So I think that connectivity piece is going to be key moving forward. I really appreciate that. I would just suggest you continue to use that terminology over and over again. I think we're going to come to some positive conclusions in the future, but great work. You've been at this for a little bit, and but I think again, when we had our strategic planning session earlier, this is yet another roadmap. This is a roadmap to help staff with guidance on how to accomplish things here, not just today, but in the next few years. And thank you for the public testimony. I really appreciate it. It's good to hear things like that, because when, we travel on the McKenzie Highway a lot, but those are things that maybe go unnoticed to us. And so you have no idea when one person comes forward. That's extremely helpful. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. And again, great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lycan. Further discussion? Then I'll just add a couple of things quickly myself. I echo what Commissioner Lycan says. Commissioner Lycan and I sit on the MPC, and so we hear a lot of testimony. And I wanted to point out at this point in time that Mr. Bill Johnson sitting in the audience from ODOT. And I'd like to thank you for being here today. Thank you for being here throughout the entire process, you and your colleagues at ODOT. And thank you for helping us to keep our eye on the ball as often as you do. You know, it was just a few weeks ago that you were at the River Road, Santa Clara, the visioning process that we're going through, and you were there right at the ground level, seeing how that affected ODOT and how ODOT could help. That demonstrates to me that you are interested in being a partner, a close partner throughout the life of the projects that we're talking about and from now on. So thank you very much for all the work ODOT does and helps us to do in the county. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. ODOT's pleased to collaborate with your staff. This is an important plan for us too.
Thank you. Then I just have a question. It's something that comes up from time to time, and it's regarding vegetation management, which has nothing to do with this plan. But it does have to do with the safety that this plan really, the first addressing of this plan. And I think about the vegetation management right at the sides of roads, which causes deterioration in the roadbed, particularly when you have berming. I think they call it berming along the side of the road, which causes thin layers of water on there, ultimately thin layers of ice potentially. And while this plan doesn't address it, I guess, do you have any response to that? I mean, the berming, which causes additional water and gets underneath the roadbed, does that cost us more in the long run in your estimation? Is that something that we need to be thinking about a little bit more than we do?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. I will say our engineering and construction services team, which we're a part of, we collaborate very closely with our road maintenance staff under Orrin Schumacher. And I think water certainly is, something that degrades roads, of course. And then with safety, vegetative management is really important. And I think road maintenance is, making greater efforts to try to reduce noxious weeds and improve safety on those key corridors. And that's something we're also doing through the implementation of our safety action plan, is to look at areas, for example, where we have blackberries that are perhaps like growing over guardrails and things like that. And that enters into the striped shoulder where bikes go or cars may need to pull over, and it creates an unsafe situation. So a lot of that too ties in with, as you know, staffing resources and funding. And with the passage of House Bill 2017, I think, that gives the county an opportunity to rebuild some of those those previous maintenance FTEs that were cut in years past. So I feel hopeful about that.
Thank you. And as long as we keep our eye on that ball, particularly in areas, for me, as I drive in the county roads, sometimes you get areas, particularly this time of the year, that never see the sun. And if you have a sheet of water on there, it perennially becomes a sheet of ice, and it really makes for an unsafe situation. So a ball we need to keep our eye on. So very, very well. Any further discussion before we move on Ordinance 1358? Commissioner Bozievich.
Just, I want to real quick extend my thanks to staff and everyone that's collaborated on this, the consultants and ODOT. It's a nice plan. I like the focus on safety and the fact we also brought in freight and active transportation and that connectivity with active transportation between communities. When we talk about safety a lot, though, what this plan kind of covers is one of the 4 E's, which is the engineering side of that. We still have other places we can work on safety when it comes to education, emergency response, and enforcement, which is a whole different place to go. But this is the part we have some control over, but it's also the most expensive part when you talk about engineering safety into roadways. When you talk about berming, one of the things we've changed our standard on overlays now is to use that safety edge, which kind of prevents berming, but also doesn't have as much of a problem with return to roadway issues if somebody does get out of travel lane. So we have as part of our construction standards, we are addressing some of those issues. So I really appreciate the collaboration that was involved in this. It's going to take collaboration in the future as we look at this when we're starting to talk about jurisdictional transfers of roadways so we can get to some of these safety improvements. As we look at things like some of the active transportation and connectivity, it's going to take way outside the box. As we look at the possibility of connecting Lowell with Oak Ridge, there's Forest Service gravel roads in between that might have to, be paved. Those sort of things, and how do we get to there? It's a different world, and we look at things where we're getting grants from the Forest Service for, when we worked on Sweet Creek Road to access the forest. Now we're going to be looking towards the Forest Service to participate in active transportation. We just have to keep working with some really non-traditional partners on our transportation system. So I appreciate that the plan was put together with a collaborative effort. So great job, David and Becky and Public Works staff in general. Tim, I think we got a good plan to build on.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich. Further comment? Then we have before us ordinance number 1354 and 1706. So 1354, Commissioner Bozievich.
So I will move to approve ordinance number PA 1354 and ordinance number 1706.
Should we take this one at a time?
Yes, let's do 2 votes on that.
Okay, the alternates in the staff report had us moving both at the same time. Okay, I'll move ordinance number PA 1354.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozievich, seconded by Commissioner Lycan. Discussion to the motion. I'm seeing none. Mr. Mokrahajski, this is an ordinance, so we'll require a roll call vote.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Aye.
Commissioner Bozievich?
Aye.
Commissioner Lycan?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
And Commissioner Farr?
Aye. Passes unanimously. Commissioner Bozievich.
So I'll move approval of ordinance number 17-06.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozievich, seconded by Commissioner Lycan. Ordinance number 1706. Discussion to the motion. I see none. Mr. Mokrahajski, this also is an ordinance, so please conduct the roll call vote.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Aye.
Commissioner Bozievich?
Aye.
Commissioner Lycan?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
Commissioner Farr?
Aye. Passes unanimously. Good job.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations. Lots of work went into that. Wow. Then we'll move along to item 11, Mr. Mokrahajski, which is a review of assignments.
Just have the one, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bozievich's request to plan a future agenda item to update the board on SB 1051 after the February session, and then to seek guidance on future code changes.
Excellent. Questions, comments on that? Any additions or deletions? I see none. Move along. We have no need for executive session today. Other business? Any other business from the board or from Mr. Mokrahysky? I see none. Then our next meeting is 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Will be a joint meeting with the Fair Board. We are adjourned.